All right, guys, Mr. Vieira back, uh, talking about political culture. So where I got cut off, it was land ownership. So land ownership typically meant that you had a voice, that you were a member of society that could make decisions. So in British North America, there were far more. There was land was available, um, as long as you were willing to steal it from a Native American. But land was available, and so yeah,
And you wrote it right.
yes. You had to have privilege, but land ownership was far more widely dispersed, I guess, for lack of a better word, than in Britain itself. So more white men were voting. Because of that, society was a little bit more loose. It was less tightly controlled. There was more local control over local issues than you would see in Britain, where most decisions were coming out of London, were coming out of Parliament. That there was decisions that were made over the entire island and colonies that were a little bit closer to Britain. So the American colonists very early on, they embraced this idea of the social contract, that the government made decisions because the people put it in place to make decisions. This is going to be huge when we start talking about the revolutionary spirit, because an American colonist is far more likely to respect and listen to a body that is making a decision close to it, like the House of Burgesses, for example, than the King of England, who they did not give ownership of themselves over to, and they do not feel like the social contract really fit that person. They felt like it fit more the local control that they gave power to. Another interesting kind of phenomenon in the American colonial society is this idea of the print culture. American colonists read. They read nonstop, anything that they could get their hands on, and pamphlets and newspapers were often printed and circulated around communities, traded amongst neighbors. You're going to see this especially true in more in city areas, more urban areas, towns like Boston, in which print culture was rampant. And this is important because these are people exchanging ideas, not only in conversation and taverns or on the streets, but through the written word. And this is going to help kind of fan the flames of the revolutionary spirit that you begin to see spreading throughout the colonies. In terms of women's rights, colonial women had more rights, relatively speaking, than their British counterparts. However, when a woman married in British North America, all her political and economic rights went to her husband. Whether it was land ownership, whether it was any voice that she had in the community, that went to her husband. So um, American colonial women on the eve of revolution really did not have much of a voice in society. During the revolution, we will discuss ways in which women impacted it tremendously, but really their rights were hampered by their male overlords, I guess you could say, up until pretty much 1776, in which you'll start to see women play a very active role in shaping the politics and the economics during the Revolutionary War.
All right, Mr. Eskridge back here to talk about the Great Awakening. All right, so just kind of taking a step back, we remember that a lot of people traveled to North America seeking religious freedom, and so by the 1730s, by the 1740s, we have kind of the grandchildren of that generation, that original generation that had come over from England into this wilderness and had established this city on a hill, as we remember John Winthrop saying. And so by this time, because of all these things that we talked about, because of consumer culture, because of the institution of slavery, because of people just getting settled, print culture, people reading other things that are going on. Remember, the Enlightenment is happening at this time, so people are reading non-religious texts and really starting to question, these long-held structural norms that many times kept come down from the church. They started to question, what is our role in society? And for the people that were still really connected to religion, they saw this as being very dangerous. That this was something that kind of spat in the face of their ancestors who had come here seeking religious freedom in order to build this city on a hill. And so we have the Great Awakening. And when we look retrospectively or kind of look at it historically, we see the Great Awakening as this kind of one of the things that's going to unify the colonies. But while it was happening, it was not necessarily that. That was not the case. We saw these different preachers that are moving around. They're really mobile, working in different regions. So someone maybe in New England maybe other people in the South, other middle colonies that are doing these kind of revival movements. So, going out into a public space and preaching this really fiery message about how American society and American culture has gone away from its religious roots. And there's a lot of people that, that lend a sensitive ear to that and join the movement, convert to Christianity, and, are awoken, to kind of use the term from the historical name of it. Um, and so, but it is significant that this is really kind of the first mass movement of people that are kind of unified around a similar thing. And we're going to see that that unification is going to play out a little bit later in the American Revolution. This also is exampled, kind of this idea of unification by what Mr. Vieira was talking about with the print culture. So we have these texts, these sermons that are, typed up or written out, not typed up, and then printed. And so these are read throughout the colonies. So a preacher that may have exclusively lived and preached in New England may be being read by someone in the South, and so this exchange of ideas is going on. So it's kind of the 18th century version of social media, kind of in a way, where people are feeling connected, even though they might be miles or hundreds of miles, thousands of miles apart from each other. So that's really significant. And we're going to see a second Great Awakening and so on and so forth throughout this course. So this is kind of just the first one. So just kind of remember these major facts that are going on here.
Okay, so I'm going to discuss the 7 Years' War, and I just noticed a typo. It's also known as the French and Indian War. It's not the 7 Years' War, also known as the 7 Years' War. But okay, so if war is your thing, this probably isn't the class for you. And what I mean by that is not to say that warfare is not significant, and not to say that the sacrifice that people make for king, country, and God isn't important. It's just that's not a real focus of this class. Warfare tactics, battle tactics, that's not something that we really discuss. It's more a social history class. So when we talk about warfare, we're looking at the impact that the war had on society, the political, economic, and social ramifications of warfare. So, 7 Years' War. This is like the first actual world war that it's fought on many different continents, and it's primarily between England and France, but there's some other players involved. In terms of the North American conflict, the French had been encroaching upon English lands in the American colonies, taking captives, in general, kind of harassing American colonists. So the war breaks out, and many Americans, and we start to use that word Americans because the French and Indian War, or the 7 Years' War, is really the first time where being an American is a thing. And the sentiment of being an American kind of starts to resonate amongst the colonists that perhaps there's something different than being British. But war breaks out. People die. It's terrible. A couple of things of note from the 7 Years' War. The Albany Congress. Benjamin Franklin creates sort of one of the first political cartoons in human history, the Join or Die cartoon. He was trying to unite the colonies under the Albany Congress to really support the war effort and to throw resources and money behind the English in support of the war. It ultimately fails. The colonies don't want to give up their sovereignty. They do not want to give up some of the decision-making power they had in order to support this war effort. Ultimately, what you need to know about the 7 Years' War itself, as a result of it, the British win. They receive Canada. France is completely kicked out of North America. And really, in 1763, after the Treaty of Paris, Britain is the largest empire on earth and one of the largest empires in the history of mankind. And it pretty much is the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world at that point, I would say. Now, for American history, there's going to be some huge ramifications that result from the war. And ultimately, the beginning of the American Revolution is the end of the 7 Years' War. And so Mr. Eskridge is going to wrap this up with some of the impact that it had.
All right. So the 7 Years' War really marked the beginning of the end of British control over the colonies. And as you can imagine, war is extremely expensive. And so Great Britain started to look at, how are we going to pay for this war? And it makes a lot of sense, really, to tax the people, to charge the people in which you fought the war to protect. And so the colonists, though, are like, that doesn't sound good. You know, again, they had enjoyed this consumptionism, they had enjoyed this relative freedom